Welcome, changemakers, to tonight's Fireside Chat. I'm Esmeralda Herrera, Director of Programs and Community Relations at Communitas America, and we're super honored to have Jessica Santana, co-founder and CEO of America on Tech. Now, since Jessica is coming in with, named 40 Forbes 30 under 30, right? New York City, 40 under 40 rising stars, Ashoka emerging innovator, and there's so much more. Her nonprofit, America on Tech, has been featured in major media outlets such as Forbes, CNN, Huffington Post, BET, and the list goes on. And America on Tech's mission is to prepare the next gen of tech leaders. So welcome, Jessica. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
For sure. Now, we have some great questions for Jessica, but if you're watching, please go ahead and type your question in the Q&A box, and we'll definitely be saving the last 15 minutes to try to dive in as many questions as possible. So we look forward to all of them. So now, Jessica, we got some new folks with us tonight. So give us a little summary. Who is Jessica Santana, and what is America on Tech?
Yeah, for sure. So first and foremost, I'm really happy to be here with you all tonight. As Esmeralda mentioned, my name is Jessica Santana. I'm CEO of America on Tech. America on Tech is an early pipeline technology talent accelerator on a mission to prepare the next generation of technology leaders. Our vision is that we use the growing technology sector to decrease the economic and racial wealth gap in America. Right now, computing jobs are the top sources of new wages in the United States, yet so many young people of color from low-income populations are often left out of spaces of innovation. And so we really believe that there's tremendous opportunity to change that. On a personal level, I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I'm Puerto Rican. So go Boricuas. I'm very excited about, the opportunity to shift the narrative about what women's leadership can look like. I'm one of the very few Latinas who actually lead a national nonprofit organization. And so I wear that, really clearly on my back. And I make sure that, I'm representing for everyone who hasn't had the same opportunities that I have had. I was first generation in my family to graduate from college and even obtain a job in the private sector. And I think just thinking about my experiences attending public schools in New York City, K through 12, who were often under-resourced, and thinking about what that journey was like from adolescence to adulthood and to my first career in technology, I think are all the things that have led me to be doing the work that I'm doing right now.
And definitely should be proud. Like, I think in one of your videos that I saw, you said, look, this is my accent. It's not going to change. And I felt that deep in my heart. So I think you're a phenomenal role model. And you're right, one of the very few Latinas really making, with a nonprofit that's a national led, really making a huge difference. And I think we want to see more of that. And so thank you for paving one of those paths. So my first question is, so we know the infamous story, right, of you and your co-founder, who's also president of America on Tech, Evan Robinson, crafting the beginnings of America on Tech on the back of like napkins at Starbucks. So tell us, why did you get started? Why then? Why at that very moment?
Yeah, it was so interesting because my co-founder, Evan Robinson, who is with us this evening, thank you so much for joining, Evan. He's my very best friend. Him and I share very similar academic and career trajectories. We actually met in 2009 prior to even thinking about America on Tech, and him and I have just been best friends ever since. And it just so happens that our academic and career trajectories followed a very similar path. And it also happens that while we met at Syracuse University, which is our alma mater, we also grew up about 4 or 5 blocks away from each other in East New York, Brooklyn. So we didn't even know each other until we actually went to college and met on campus. But, in 2014, I had just, started my career in technology. I was really early on in my career, and so was Evan. And there were a lot of things that we had questions about. How was it possible that we were the only people of color on our teams a lot of times? How was it possible that I was the only woman on my team sometimes? And how was it also possible that there seems to be this narrative, among the community that talks about talent from a very deficit mindset, right? We talk about that there is no pipeline of talent. And, we were reading a lot of reports during that time that talked about specifically the Brooklyn Tech Triangle and how they felt like they couldn't find any local talent. And we always thought that, there was this sense of people trying to hide, the talent that was right next to places in New York City that are often overlooked and often underestimated. Because when you look at places like Brooklyn, you have companies like Etsy that are about 2 or 3 blocks away from Farragut projects, or you have companies like Google that are about 2 or 3 blocks away from subsidized housing in Chelsea. And so we had very big questions about why people felt, that there wasn't enough talent when you literally have technologists who are on the same train stations as students, and then when they get off at the same stop, they just diverge in path. They diverge in their pathways, and so it's 2 people so close in proximity to each other, yet very different in projected life outcomes. And so, rather than sitting idle and actually not doing anything about it, we felt very called and very moved to operate from a place of service and start, a project, because that's what it was at the time, to provide young people in the city of New York an opportunity to participate in innovation. And if you would have asked us in 2014 whether or not we had ambitions to scale this into a national nonprofit organization, I would have absolutely said no. At that time, we really just had the passion of wanting to serve. And it just so happened that things happened along the way that created the opportunity for me to leave, my job, and for Evan to leave his job and take the work full time. But if I'm being honest with you, back then, what really motivated us was wanting to provide opportunities for young people, and knowing that the narratives a lot of times that we read in the media about communities like Brooklyn or communities like Los Angeles that have a whole bunch of talent are not accurately reflected. And we need to start thinking about shifting the narrative from, it's not that there's no talent, it's that there's a lot of times no opportunity. And it's really incumbent on us to take on the responsibility as folks who are from the community to let people know that if they want to participate in the technology industry, that they can, and here's the opportunity to do so.
Oh, yes, Jessica, we're definitely going to get to the national shifting from, New York on tech to America on tech in a little bit. But I think something you said really resonates, right? Underestimated. And we see that a lot in these communities. And I think we see that as Communitas America, we see that a lot in our entrepreneurs. We see talent and they just seem to be overlooked. So let's talk about that underestimated. So when you started, right, with your co-founder, New York on Tech, how was it that first year? What were some of those challenges and what were some of those changes?
Yeah, for sure. I think when we first started, there was, in full honesty, we used to get questions like, whether or not, do you really believe that, you can teach low income students how to code and get degrees and careers in technology, knowing that, they're behind in math and they're behind in science. And I'm just like, yeah, we are crazy enough to believe that. And so I think the underestimation comes in really people not having a close proximity to the community. And so because they don't have a close proximity to the community, they only know what they think they believe or what they believe that they've heard, right? And so, that first year with America on Tech, we held classes at Shake Shack. We held classes in public spaces. We convinced people to just let us bring students to companies for company tours and career days. We had a launch event at Etsy in October of 2014. We raised about $10,000 for the pilot. And so it was literally Evan and I just running around with a really big idea for, us bringing opportunities to young people. But the first year was insane because what we learned was that one, if you give students an opportunity to participate in innovation, they absolutely take the opportunity. The second thing we learned was that there are many students that don't even know that technology is growing in their own backyards. You know, many of the students that we worked with in that first year said, hey, I have never been to Manhattan. And these were all students from Brooklyn. And so we're taking them to Microsoft, and you're taking them to, you know, startups that are located within buildings. They're like, whoa, like I never even knew that this was, you know, happening within 10 to 15 minutes from my house. And then the last thing I think that we learned was that regardless of what people believe about young, talented students who are from places like East New York or places like the Bronx, what folks need to understand is that regardless of like where they're from, their zip code does not have to determine where they go. And we've seen how many of those students are now operating in digital roles, right? How many of them have graduated from college? How many of them have actually just gone off and started careers in technology? And so for us, you know, the first year, I think it was about proving the value of Evan and I as founders of the organization, convincing people that young people, when given the opportunity, that they can be successful. And I think the other piece was, you know, actually like letting the students know that if they wanted to participate in innovation, that they could, and that these were the things that we were going to do to help them get there, because I don't even know that they believed themselves at that point in time that they could do it.
For sure. And, you know, so much of what you said really resonated with me. I know I've heard a story of you. You're like, look, I was on MySpace, right? Coding, changing my profile background. And that was me too. And had someone just said, yo, you're coding, right? Like, yo, you're doing something. Then it's all of a sudden you open doors, right? And you're starting to see, okay, maybe this is something I could do, right? But when you don't know what you don't know, you're not going to know it, right? So let's dive just a little bit deeper into that first year, because I think a lot of our entrepreneurs, although some of them are just starting out, some of them are in their third year or fourth year, but I think that first year is kind of pivotal, right? And so what were some of those pivotal moments for you and for New York on Tech at that time?
Yeah, for sure. You know, so Evan and I, when we started the organization in 2014, the first thing we asked ourselves, so what are the things we know and what are the things we don't know? So for the things that we knew how to build a program, we knew how to build a curriculum, we knew how to recruit volunteers, we knew how to establish a budget if we needed to. But what we didn't know was how to get objective advice about the things that we were doing. Because when you're an entrepreneur, a lot of times, you know, you're kind of talking to yourself. It can feel like a lonely journey. And so what we did in that first year is that we established an advisory board. It wasn't a board of directors. It was just an advisory board. This comprised of relationships that I personally had, that Evan had personally had. And we just reached out to people that we really considered meant to be mentors, and people that we really considered to be folks that we trusted and who we thought would be genuinely invested in the work that we were doing. So the first year, it was about galvanizing a community of supporters who were in mid to senior level roles within their companies that can really help us understand some of the things that we could be doing better. In that first year too, it was also about creating buzz and creating communication channels between us and important stakeholders within the community. So many times you see nonprofit organizations build programs and products and services that are intended to serve a community, yet they never have community voice or community input, right? And so when you're thinking about the co-creation of programs, or you're thinking about the co-creation of working in partnership with communities, it was very important that in that first year, Evan and I sat down with parents, and we sat down with teachers, and we sat down with principals, and we sat down with young people to ensure that the thing that we were building was actually going to solve a problem in the long term, right? Because at that time, we did an analysis of the availability of technology education in New York City. And at the time, you know, there were a few people who were doing 1 or 2 day hackathons or summer programs, but there wasn't anything at that time that felt robust enough to move the needle towards a pathway, a true pathway to economic, you know, empowerment for the students that we envisioned. And so that second piece I would say that we did was really sit down and talk to users and talk to community members and talk to the folks that were we deemed the most important, because while that was not a scalable process, that was definitely a process that I think helped us build and design a really great and amazing program. And then the third thing I think that we did in that third year was be really diligent about the way that we spent money. You know, when we launched at SU, we only raised about $10,000, which means that that was not enough to pay for staff. That was not enough to pay for even a program manager, if I'm being honest with you. And so as a result of that, in that first year, we were very intentional about pouring all of that $10,000 into the actual program and making sure that when we were ready to seek, larger investments from sponsors and from organizations and from foundations, that it would be preparation meeting opportunity rather than opportunity meeting us and then us not being prepared. And so all of the money went into really building the program and the product. And so for us, I think those were the three things that we really prioritized in 2014 to make sure that we, were ready for a really successful second year. And maybe actually, and the fourth thing I'll actually add was that we were really good at building relationships with people who wanted to tell our story. Because what ended up happening was that Evan and I were featured in BET's digital publication. And that article actually got into the hands of the folks who actually gave us our first grant, which was Camelback Ventures, and they gave us $50,000, and that is what seeded the organization to take us full time. And so I would even say, in your first year, really focus on storytelling, really focus on telling people what problem it is that you want to solve, because folks want to be a part of your journey, right? It's always really exciting when people feel like you are inventing something or you're building something from scratch, because it allows them to understand that if they wanted to play a role in helping you in some way, that they absolutely can.
Amazing. I think really good feedback, right? You're doing lots of nitty gritty customer research, right? Not just from the students that you're serving, but their parents, right? And the local community is so vital. And what I really enjoyed about your answer is that you were like, look, we only had 10K, but we made it work. And that resonates so much with Communitas America, because we give out small grants of 10K. And sometimes we're like, oh, is it enough? Is it good? But you said, look, it was enough because I made do, right? Obviously, you want to keep building off of it. And we'll talk about how you keep doing that. But that 10K, that initial 10K really brought forth, right, America on Tech, and be able to push out that pilot program. So that sounds really great. My next question, Jessica. So many of our entrepreneurs have found it quite challenging, right, to shift to a full-time entrepreneurship. So what was your experience like for that? And were you ever doubtful?
Yeah, it's so interesting because once we got the $50,000 from Camelback Ventures, a contingency was that you have to actually take this work full time. And so in February of 2015, we were notified about Camelback. We actually hadn't received the funding yet. We were pretty sure we were going to, and at that time we were like, you know what, I was like, I'm gonna leave and I'm gonna see where we can actually take this. And I would say that it was a pretty risk-averse decision, right? I didn't leave and didn't have money in the bank. I didn't leave and didn't have a side hustle that was helping me. I think oftentimes you hear war stories of entrepreneurs that are like, well, I handed in my pink slip and I decided to leave and then everything worked out well. And that wasn't the case for me, right? As a Latina and as someone who grew up in a low-income community, I have responsibilities. My mom and dad are dependent of me. I send money back home, and there are a lot of people that I take care of with my finances outside of myself. And so I knew that I couldn't make an irrational decision like that without actually also compromising the lives of people that I really loved. And so when February came around, I looked at my runway and I looked at my savings account in the bank, and I was like, oh, okay, good. I have about like a year's worth of runway. If things don't work out, I can always go back to work. Right? Nothing is going to take away my 4 years at Syracuse undergrad, and nothing was going to take away my master's degree. Nothing was going to take away my 2 years of experience in the private sector, and nothing was going to take away my professional network that can get me a job if things didn't work out with America on Tech at the time. And so in really thinking about my preparation, it was making sure that I had a runway in the bank, making sure that if my runway ran out, I still had some kind of side hustle coming in. So for me, during that first year, I was coaching, I was doing freelance web design, I was participating in certain paid speaking engagements. You know, if at that time Uber was around, which I think it was, it just wasn't as popular, I probably would have been driving Uber, right? Whatever I needed to do to make it work, and have a schedule that was flexible in order for me to generate income and then also, you know, work on my business. But, you know, when I really think about that first year, it was a very risk-averse decision. I had the promise and potential of $50,000 from our first investor. I had 1 year's runway in the bank that, you know, was going to help me. And I also had already established certain things around our program and our product that when I left, this was going to be more about sales than it was about having to build something from scratch. So if I could give advice to any entrepreneurs, just know that before you make, you know, the decision to leave, there are certain things that you can do while you're still an employee of an organization that will set you up for success when you do decide to leave full time.
Yes, great. I think, you know, you're right, Jessica, right? Like every entrepreneur is going to have their own journey, but I think we don't hear story like yours enough, right? Like Latino entrepreneurs who are the first generation in their family to graduate college, right? And you're saying, look, not everyone's going to have the capacity to do this, but this is what my story. And those are the stories we need to hear, right? Because all the entrepreneurs at Communitas America, they don't have always a lot of you know, cushion, but what were some ways that you can make that cushion, right? So that's really important. So, you know, first year you did your pilot, right? You were able to raise that 10K, right? You got the Camelback 50K. That was really good. And then, you know, start moving along. Now we have 6 full years now with America on Tech, but America on Tech didn't start off, right? It started off nationally, right? It began as New York on Tech. So how did you and your team decide to shift to a national serving nonprofit?
Yeah, for sure. You know, so we have had multiple opportunities as early as like 2015, 2016 to take the organization nationally. But Evan and I are very intentional about not scaling too fast and compromising program quality. At that point, you know, we'd only been 3 years in operation. We only had 3 classes of students who graduated from our high school programs and no students yet that had graduated from our college programs, right? So our outcomes and our data wasn't strong enough, in our opinion, to tell an impactful story about our model in a way that we felt confident in saying this works, right? Granted, that is our approach to this because we want to keep the integrity of our programs. You have a lot of folks who are ready to scale nationally, who are ready to bring programs any and everywhere when the, you know, money aligns. But for us, it really was important to take a step back and make sure that we always understood what our why was, and that in the process of trying to quote unquote get a bag, that we weren't just moving fast without the outcomes that we wanted to achieve. And so after our first graduating class of students, which was in 2018, in preparation for 2019, we said it is time for us to evaluate what is good about America on Tech, what we've done very well, and think about the things that we have and the things we've done that are scalable. So what we ended up doing was that we ended up engaging in a strategic expansion plan with Accenture, and they ended up doing a really big feasibility study for us that outlined where a program like ours could actually work. Because there was a need and there was also a growing technology industry within that community. And we settled on Los Angeles because Los Angeles has a huge, huge population of Black and Brown students, a huge technology growing technology sector, and a huge public school system that is often under-resourced, that is similar and comparable to that in New York City. And so we made that decision and we pitched, you know, a budget to a few of our corporate sponsors that ended up seeding the expansion to Los Angeles in August 2019. But even though the study was done in August 2018, we still took a year to make sure that we were doing things in an intentional way. And we didn't want to just go for the sake of saying that we're a national organization. And so we launched our pilot in Los Angeles with 150 students in August 2019. We worked with 2 high schools out here and a few community-based organizations, have had multiple corporate activations, have done a lot of community galvanizing in the same way that we treated the first year of New York on Tech. It's the same way that we're treating the first year of, America on Tech in Los Angeles. And this year we had another incoming class of 150 students that started with us in August of 2020. And so, for us, the things that really scaled was obviously our content and our curriculum, our relationships between New York and Los Angeles, being able to take advantage of the digital environment. And now that we're in the mid-COVID, has also been helpful. And so we had, we had 5 years of a track record in New York City before even thinking about bringing our programs to Los Angeles. And I think that in trying to convince, sponsors and funders to say, hey, bring us to LA, it wasn't difficult because the numbers matched the outcome that we promised. And then they knew that since we did it well in New York, that we could also do it well in another city. So those are the things that led to the expansion. I mean, we're not going to stop. We've learned a lot about what it's like to work in these dual communities, because though they're both big cities, they're both very different regions, very different, community needs, very different cultures. But I'm happy to say that, in our short time period here, we've had 100% partner retention on the school side, 100% partner retention on the corporate side, and didn't decrease any of our enrollment numbers even in the amid the pandemics. And so we're really happy, and we're looking forward to continuing to do that work.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Something that you said in your answer, as you were saying, look, even though we were ready to go national, we didn't, right? And we were always constantly, questioning, like, why? Like, is this going to be able to stay with our mission, right? So let's talk about that social impact. Many of our entrepreneurs are critically analyzing their social impact all the time, and how should it be represented? And is it aligning with ultimately the theory of change that they want to make? So what does that look like for America on Tech? How do you know that you're actually being able to create that social impact that you set out to do? And do you have any case studies that you might be able to share with us?
Yeah, for sure. The first story that I actually want to tell as a case study is a young woman in our programs. I won't say her name, but it was so interesting because in our second year of operations, Evan and I were still doing programmatic things. And so we would go to schools and do information sessions when recruitment for our programs were happening. And I remember being at Williamsburg Prep, a school in Brooklyn, and there was a young lady, and she came up to me. She was like, I heard that you run tech programs. I didn't get to go to your information session, but listen, I've been trying to convince the principal here to bring computer science, and he doesn't want to do it, and I don't understand why. So how can I get involved? And she was like, here's my card. I was like, oh my God, this 16-year-old student has a card. This is amazing. So we ended up keeping in touch. And when enrollment came around, we gave her access, to the application. She applied. She got admitted into the program. She is Puerto Rican from Brooklyn, first in her family to also graduate from high school and then go to college. And now she's majoring in computer science at one of the in one of the country's biggest liberal arts colleges. And so for us, this student in particular has graduated from our programs. 2 of our programs, has obtained multiple internships through our employer partner network, has recently gotten into the MasterCard Technology Mentorship Program. She's interned with AOL, she's interned with Vocabulary, and to think that there's no one in her family that's ever even pursued a career in the private sector or yet alone, a career in technology, and knowing that her school never even offered this content in the first place, and for us felt like it's always a win, right? When you see a young student who didn't have access to a program like yours because of the school that they attended or because of the community they're in, and then actually now see them, flourishing in computer science programs is really awesome. And another story that comes to mind for me is the McCollum family. So, we had one student who did our program in 2016. Since she did the program, she's had 3 other siblings actually do the programs. All have gone through the program. She's currently the president of our alumni council. She has come back as a peer mentor. So has her sister, and her brother is currently in our programs as well. She's obtained multiple internships at Deutsche Bank and at an engineering company through our program. And she's just a testament to how you invest in one student, and generationally, you get to invest in their families and communities as well. But from a more numeric perspective, for us, it's really thinking about what is the delta of the thing we're trying to accomplish with young people, right? That's the first thing. Before we design any program at America on Tech, is thinking, what is the delta? How do we get a student from A and how do we get them to Z? And so for us, it's making sure that the schools that we recruit from only have a population of students where 50% or more of the population is eligible for free or reduced lunch, ensuring that in our recruitment process, we're only selecting students of color, so that for us, we define students of color as those who are Black, Latinx, those who are Asian, those who are Middle Eastern. Our numbers are more Black and Latinx, obviously, because of the landscape of New York City and how poverty manifests. And then also ensuring that we're selecting students based on other demographic priorities. So for us, it's looking for young women of color. For us, is looking for those who are non-gender conforming and prioritizing those candidates in the process. Once a student is admitted, they do a pre-test on the things that they've learned. Many of them can't pass the pre-test because they're attending schools that don't have robust computer science or coding curriculums. And then having a post-test for them even after the program that measures, what they were able to learn within the time span that they were with us, whether it was a semester-long program or a year-long program. On top of that, we're collecting data on how many of them go straight into jobs after our program, how many of them have been accepted to college after our programs, whether 2-year or 4-year, whether private or public. We're also collecting data on how many of them are pursuing computer science as a result of that. If they do decide not to go straight into a tech job and they decide to go straight into, college itself. And last but not least, now that we have a growing alumni population, is actually measuring the wages that they are able to generate once they actually obtain a job in technology. So if a student is reporting, I have received SNAP benefits, as a young person, that gives us an indicator of how much their household income is, and then compare it to their first jobs in technology, which oftentimes are anywhere between $85,000 to $120,000 a year. We can see the delta in that way as well. So it's definitely an art. It is not a science. I know we try to make we try to make impact scientific, not realizing that everything in an individual's life is very fluid, right? So we don't treat all of our students the same. For us, the ultimate goal is that 80% of our students are either majoring in technology or going straight into technology jobs after our programs. And I'm happy to report that 85% of our students actually obtain degrees and or careers in technology, are currently enrolled in a CS program, or actually are working in the industry proper. The other 15% of students, it's very hard to tell you, all the things that happen to them, from they can't participate because they're not, documented, right? So they can't obtain employment even if they wanted to. Other things that have stood in the way from us reaching that 100% mark is, students not being able to complete programs because of financial reasons, right? They need work immediately. or, you know, students not being able to really navigate the corporate environment. So they'll end up with a job, but they'll hate it because they don't like the private sector and it's not conducive to people of color, so they leave. So there are a lot of things that have impacted that number, but we're definitely above the threshold that we set out for ourselves. I know that was a lot of info, but
That's great. That's phenomenal. And I think you talked a little bit about everything, right? Like your ecosystem is so strong, right? That the students that you've served come back and they become mentors for your students. And I think that is the type of ecosystem we want to build, right? That's the type of theory of change that we want to see. And so just for a very practical, right? For our entrepreneurs who may be starting off with collecting some of that impact, what are some ways that you collected? How are you collecting even that data to know that you need to, that you're never, that not never, but that it's going to be different to get to that 100% because there's other barriers that maybe other organizations need to serve?
yeah, for sure. So just so that I understand your question correctly, you're asking about how we go about collecting the data?
Yes. So just, and this is super easy, but just wanting to see some of that practical for our entrepreneurs who may be viewing, to hear how has that been changing and how you've been collecting that data from day one all the way to now.
Yeah, for sure. You know, it was very easy to do this and like this when we only had 20 students, but we're working with almost 1,000 students annually now. And so I will say that when we first started, you know, if you are in year one of your business and you're trying to collect data, I would say use a lot of the free tools like Google Sheets and Google Forms. Try to make sure that you're using tools like MailChimp that allow you to create, you know, really cheap CRMs that allow you to segment populations based on, you know, certain interests that you may have or certain kind of communication channels that you want to build within the organization. Now we're a little bit more robust. You know, we're in the process of, you know, finalizing a Salesforce system and developing and implementing the Salesforce system. You know, we have project management tools like Monday.com that we use to collect the data. And we also make sure that, you know, there are systems of accountability within our team that forces them, for lack of a better word, to report back on a weekly basis the kind of outcomes that they're seeing in our classes and in our trainings weekly. So we're not going to wait until a program is over to collect the data, right? There has to be a life cycle of your data strategy, starting from, you know, the kind of information you collect on your application forms to, you know, down to the point where a student finishes your actual program, which in my mind are your key performance indicators in the interim, and then ultimately post your program, what are the KPIs that you're setting out for that? And so I always say, you know, think about the life cycle of data flow through your organizations and actually map it out. You know, it might be helpful to create an Airtable that helps you do this. It also might be helpful to just have a visual flowchart representation that you might be able to, you know, develop and prototype so that you know what you're holding yourself accountable to, especially for us as a nonprofit, very data driven, because we have to report, you know, our impact to funders and to corporate sponsors and to foundations. So
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think that was really helpful, just on a practical level. So now let's talk about funding. And, one of our future questions will be talking about the Power Fund. But before we get there, sometimes the hardest part is funding for a nonprofit, right? And especially a nonprofit that is led by people of color, right? It's they're underfunded, right? Underestimated. But how difficult was it securing the bag starting off in that year one? So when you were talking about the initial 10K, how difficult was it? The Camelback 50K as the second donor. Talk a little bit about that.
yeah, for sure. I will say, regardless if you're a very well-established organization, down to you being a small organization, fundraising in general, or even if you're a for-profit, fundraising in general is just difficult, right? No one wants to always just write you a check, regardless of what you're building or how compelling you are. And so in the beginning stages, you know, we focused a lot on individuals because we knew that we had no data, we had no traction. Evan and I had no connections in the philanthropic space. We didn't have any, you know, mom and dads that worked in the private sector that could write us our first, you know, investments. We know that many of the nonprofits that, you know, are led a lot of times by those who come from more upper middle class communities or higher income communities can lean on their friends and family to seed their ideas, but that wasn't necessarily the case for us, right? If I would have went to my mom and dad and said, "Ma, you know, I need $5,000 so that I could, you know, start a nonprofit," my mom and dad would have been like, "Well, we are the nonprofit. I am your beneficiary, you know, so how can I give you $5,000, right?" So there was literally no one in our families that could actually write us our initial rounds of funding. So what we did was we said, well, we have friends, right, that we've graduated school with. Maybe they're making about $70,000 to $150,000 a year. Maybe some of them will be willing to write us like $20, $25 checks. Maybe we can have the fundraising event, get people to buy tickets, use the ticket sales to actually fund the event. And so that initial $10,000 was all individual giving. We didn't get any corporate sponsorships in our first year. We didn't get any big grants except for the Camelback grant in that first year. Everything was just relying on our networks. I will say that, you know, as time passed, we had data and we had metrics and we had outcomes, but we didn't get our first institutional grant until the ending of our second year. You know, everything in the first year was accelerators, was fellowships, was, you know, small grant funding from, you know, organizations like Communitas, and then all individuals at that point. We also had, you know, members of our board who gave to the organization as well. But really it wasn't a sustainable model up until, you know, the start of our third year of operations came, and we were like, okay, I think we understand like how this game is going to be played now. And so the one thing I can say about fundraising though is that, you know, there has to be a plan attached to it, right? A lot of people, especially in the nonprofit sector, they think that people are just going to write you a check, and that's not the case, right? People want to see your impact. People want to see that you're making change. People want to talk to your students. People want to talk to your funders, right? Once one person writes you a check, they're going to vet you with other funders as well. And people also want to know that if you're also using corporate sponsors, people also want to know that other companies are funding you as well. And so I think that my one piece of advice is that in the first couple of months in the first year, really focus on having a strong product and program, right? If I'm a student in your program, or I'm a, you know, beneficiary of whatever solution you're building, I want to be able to tell a good story about how you impacted my life, right? And I'm gonna give a good story if that is truly what you did. And so, you know, in our first year, we really focused on the program. And then in the second year, we really focused on talking to people like, well, how are you raising money as a nonprofit? Well, how are you raising money as a nonprofit? And I think our participation in fellowships and accelerator programs started to demystify how all of this worked, which is why we were able to grow the budget in the following year. But it's a monster to fundraise and to do that every single year. But obviously, you know, all the hours that you put into this process makes the work worth it, because, you know, we impact so many young people that just come back and say thank you, that sometimes the work doesn't feel like it's actual work. You know what I mean? The other thing I will say is you have to have, like I was starting to say, you have to have a plan attached to it, right? You know, create a target list of people that you want to build relationships with, set up meetings with them, see if they'll take meetings with you, and be relentless. Don't take no for an answer. Just because something is no now does not mean that it'll be no later, right? There are people who, you know, we were trying to cultivate as funders as early as 2015, 2016, that didn't even take a look at us until 2018, 2019, right? People feel, really protective of their brands, and people who also feel very protective of their bags. And so as a result of that, you have to really compel them to want to be a part of your mission a lot of times. And I think there were a lot of things along the way that sent them signals that we didn't fit a typical pattern, right? Evan and I are Black and brown, right? There aren't a lot of Black and brown nonprofit leaders, and when they are, they a lot of times are not working on their things full time. And I would also say that Evan and I didn't go to Ivy Leagues, right? And so that sent a signal, well, like maybe they're not prepared, right? So there were a lot of things that counted against us, but these were the same things that made us gritty and resilient. And I always tell people, if there are funders here, you should not be focused on someone's pedigree, right? Like you should be focused on someone's distance traveled. Because if I was smart enough to get in front of you, right, and I was smart enough to find myself in this room with you, it says something about my hustle, and it says something about my determination, because the way that social networks work in our country are such that there are certain people that don't even get through the door. So if I'm in front of you, that should actually tell you a story or indicate to you that I'm doing something correct to even be in this room with you right now.
Yeah, no, super powerful. Just resonate a lot with kind of what you said. And, just looking at the time, we want to leave, about 15 or 10 minutes for questions, but I got one more question. So firstly, congratulations on the Power Fund. And for those that don't know, the Power Fund is an initiative by Robin Hood to fund and elevate nonprofit leaders of color who show the mission of increasing mobility from poverty while addressing the interplay in racial justice and economic justice, right? Because challenges that they're trying to solve here is that the leaders of colors have been overlooked and underfunded. So tell us, the Power Fund, how is that? That's just recently happened here in October. How was the process? How does it feel?
Yeah, I think that was one of the happiest moments for my co-founder and I, right? It made us feel seen, and it made us feel worthy. I think what people don't realize is that when you are leading an organization, and especially a nonprofit organization that's based in community, when we're raising money, it's not for us, right? Like Evan and I don't have equity stake in America on Tech. We don't own a percentage of America on Tech, right? Everything that we're doing is in the interest of moving culture forward. And so when we're asking you to write a check, it is really truly because that money is going to go to support more young people and more young people in deeper ways. And so for us, while the Power Funds was an investment in our leadership and into America on Tech, it was also an investment in our community. Because what it said was that I value organizations that are established by people of color, that are building products and programs and solutions for people of color, because these are the people who should have a seat at the table to determine the destinies of the communities that they're from. And for us, we were elated when we received the news. We told our board, they were also elated to receive the news. And I'm really happy that the Robin Hood Foundation established this fund and that they considered Evan and I for its inaugural class of leaders, because we really believe that this is a model that every single foundation across the United States should adopt when they think about establishing partnerships with communities and not for them.
Yes, thank you so much, Jessica. We are super excited to congratulate you and one of our very own here in the Bronx, Geraldine Rodriguez from Knowledge House, who you guys are both the inaugural beneficiaries of the Power Fund. Now, I'm gonna, due to sake of time, I'm gonna jump over here into some of the questions, and hopefully some will follow up on the Power Fund. But the first one that I see here that I think would be really helpful for some of our entrepreneurs is, when was the first year as a nonprofit organization working in a competitive city like New York for you to be able to scale up?
When was the first year?
So during that first year for you in New York on tech, you know, and New York is very competitive. We have so many nonprofits coming out every single year. And so how difficult or easy was it for you to be able to scale up and become one of the top national tech pipelines at that time?
Mm-hmm. I would say that, you know, that first year I think we did things that didn't scale, right? Like we only worked in that first year with 20 students. In that second year, we only worked with 40 students. I really am being honest in that Evan and I were very intentional about not growing too fast, too quickly, and really focusing on having a strong product and a strong program and service for young people. You know, we didn't get to the 100 student mark until our third class of students. And part of it was because we knew that if we grew and there were still things about our programs that we weren't happy with, that those things were also manifest in the culture that we would be building at the organization. And young people would be like, this is not helpful at all, right? So the first 2 years we did things that didn't scale, and we focused on just building a really good program and a really good service for young people, and also, you know, invited people to come see what we were doing. You know, while we were small, we were still telling people, you know, that we were big, right? Like people would be like, you know, well, how many students? And we'd be like 40. And if for us, that felt like an amazing number, right? Maybe for some people, they'd be like, what? Like 40, that's so small. But for us, starting from where we were from, we doubled in the first year, right? We went from 20 to 40 in the second year. So for us, that was a huge thing to be able to say. And so I think it was how we also approached it, right? It was like, we have this vision, it's 40 now, but it's going to be 1 million later, right? And we still believe that. We still believe that America on Tech can reach millions of students across the country. And I think part of, you know, that first year is doing things that don't scale, so that you can actually like build programs and products that solve the problem, so that when you are ready for scale, it is preparation meeting opportunity.
Yes, awesome. And I'm just gonna keep throwing out some questions for you, Jessica, so we can get through a few of them if we can. And so we have a few here, just kind of choosing a few till we get to. So someone asked, like, out of 150 students, how many have graduated from your program in that beginning time?
Out of those 150 students in the first year, we only
Yeah.
had 20 students in the first year. Oh,
Okay, so
I mean, out of the 150 students in LA, because we had 150 students this past year in LA. Well, technically, all of them graduated from our programs this year, right? Because we were amid a pandemic. When March came around, we loosened a lot of the graduation requirements for our students, and we still held them accountable to finishing projects and to finishing, you know, coursework and curriculum, and we still were hosting programming for them. But we also needed to be mindful in that our students' lives were disproportionately affected by this, and so we implemented weekly virtual office hours. We made sure that, you know, all of our classes took live on Zoom, that we recorded sessions, that we created a self-paced model for us to finish it. So all of them finished the program in this first year in LA, if that's what the person is asking.
yeah, I think they did mean LA. Awesome. And then the next question, you kind of dabbled into it a little bit, but I wonder if we can talk about it just a bit more. John asks, how have your outcome metrics changed as you scaled, if at all?
Yeah, no, they definitely have changed. You know, in that first year, we just wanted to see, like, would kids come? Right? Like in the first year, the real question was like, what is the demand for this work? And will they learn? So the first year was literally us collecting attendance, making sure that we had a pre and a post, and making sure that we collected student testimonials. And the only thing we held ourselves accountable to was having a good program that taught them something, where we had an 80% or more graduation rate from the program, and that you know, the students, 100% of them would matriculate into a technology-enabled degree program at the bachelor's level, or at the associate's level. And so that is all we focused on. Now our metrics have changed drastically because we're collecting employment data, right? Like we have students who are now working. And so as a result of that, we have to collect that data so that we can keep track of them and tell the story about the things that happen even post our programs. We're also collecting employer data, like how is it like working with an America on Tech student? What feedback as an employer do you have for our organization that can actually change some of the things that we're doing that might not lead our young people to, you know, strong preparation when they do end up in the workforce. Another piece of data we're collecting is what are our alumni actually experiencing at college campuses and universities across the country. You know, every single year we disseminate an alumni survey, and it's important for us, for those who have not entered jobs in technology and have decided to go the college route, it's important for us to understand what's going on in the climate of their college and university campuses. Many of them report imposter syndrome while being on campus. Many of them report being the only Black and brown students in their computer science programs. And so, you know, us thinking about what are the supports then that we need to provide them, or what are the relationships that we need to provide them to help them navigate through that. And so the metrics have changed drastically, and it's all different per program and initiative that we're running, because we're running multiple programs at this point. But the vision metrics is 80% or more graduate from computer science or information systems programs, or 80% or more obtain degrees or careers in technology. And our ultimate vision is that once students do enter the tech industry, they come back to America on Tech and serve as volunteers and serve as peer mentors for our organization, so that they can be part of pathways for other students.
And I think, you know, that last piece gets into our next question, because you talked a lot about some of those students returning, right? And not just being asked to return, right? But just wanting to do that for themselves because they know that was what they might have needed. And so the last question we have for you tonight, Jessica, is how do you define community? And what is your philosophy behind that?
How did you define the community? I'm curious about your philosophy behind. With community, like how did we define our student community, or how did we define like community overall?
Yeah, and I think I also had a similar question, but I think mostly is how do you define community to be prosperous for you at America on Tech? And so, what is the philosophy that you have? And I think it's a driving force here too, right? Because how you guys are paving America on Tech, some of it comes from that community philosophy that you have in your heart and mind.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I think that Evan and I, we always go by the mantra that we were once the students we now serve. And as a result of that, we know that it's taken a village to raise us, right? There have been multiple things that have had needed to be true in our communities in order for us to be able to do the work that we're doing today. So when we think about community, we think about what are all the things that have to be in place in order for a child to really succeed in the 21st century. So for us, it's working in partnership with schools. For us, is making sure that when a student comes into our program, if they are under the age of 18, that their parent is with them or a guardian is with them, and we're informing the parents and guardians about the work that we're doing. For us, it's about making sure that if we're running in-school programs, that we're working in partnership with teachers, that we're teaching students our curriculum, but we're also working with the teachers to ensure that they're teaching it in the ways that we want them to, you know, teach it and actually deliver it. For us, it's making sure that at the time, anytime there is policy where we can actually participate in petitioning and advancing policy forward, that we're actively a part of those committees that are advancing STEM education. And for us, we're taking a lot of that work and we're also putting it in the parent information sessions and parent materials and guardian materials when participating in our student information, in our student orientations, because it is important for them to know how they can also get involved in ensuring that their students have access to quality STEM opportunities. And then for us, it's also mobilizing the private sector, right? So much of the work that we do cannot operate in silos from the private sector, because many of these folks are employers, right? They take on our students, they provide jobs, and they are also community agents of community change, right? You cannot occupy spaces in places like Brooklyn, in places like Chelsea, and have these big technology campuses without someone holding you accountable to ensuring your engagement in the community. So for us, is working with hiring managers and also working with corporate social responsibility departments to ensure that they're deploying their dollars where they need to be in the digital space. That's how we define community.
Yeah, no, and that's, I think, really beautiful, because for us, we also believe that change cannot happen in isolation, right? And so how do we work together and with different departments to work toward the change that we want to see? Well, Jessica, thank you so much for being here with us, right? Thank you, change makers, for tuning in tonight. It's Fireside Chat, right? Check us out in November for our next Fireside Chat. And if you're interested in learning more about Communitas, visit us at communitasamerica.org. And if you want to learn more about America on Tech, please visit americaontech.org. Have a great night. Thank you so much, Jessica.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.